3 years ago, I left the headquarters of North Star Meridian in Chicago carrying a cardboard box. Not because I had resigned, but because the chief executive's son, Blake Warren, had decided that my appearance was inappropriate for the company's most important investor presentation, even though I had spent 11 months designing the technology partnership that could have saved the struggling firm from collapse. The humiliation should have broken me, especially when Blake announced my dismissal in front of the executive team just 40 minutes before the investors arrived. But as I walked through the rain toward the train station, something strange happened. Instead of feeling defeated, I realized that for the first time in years, I was free from a company that had demanded my loyalty while quietly treating my talent as disposable. My name is Evelyn Hart, and before that afternoon, I had been North Star Meridian's Director of Strategic Partnerships, the person who had negotiated with dozens of international clients, rescued failing contracts, and spent countless nights building a $3 2 billion technology alliance with a European company called Veyron Systems, whose chairman Adrian Keller had personally told me that I was the only executive he trusted to make the partnership work. I expected Adrian to be furious when I called him from the train platform and explained what had happened, but instead he became completely silent before saying, Evelyn, if they remove the person who built this agreement, then the agreement no longer exists. And within an hour, Veyron suspended the signing. Its legal team froze every document. And North Star's leadership realized that the deal they had treated as inevitable had disappeared because of the very decision they had made to embarrass me. The following morning, North Star's stock dropped nearly 20%. Three major clients requested emergency meetings, and financial reporters began questioning whether the company was capable of surviving another failed expansion, while Blake suddenly discovered that firing someone was much easier than replacing everything that person knew. I spent those days refusing every phone call and message from my former colleagues, renting a tiny lakeside apartment in Milwaukee and forcing myself to remember what life felt like without a laptop glowing beside my bed at midnight. And when my younger brother Daniel visited, he looked around at the books, plants, and unfinished paintings I had ignored for years and said, You keep calling this unemployment, Evelyn, but from where I'm standing, it looks like your first vacation from people who never deserved you. 2 weeks later, North Star's chairman Malcolm Reed finally came to my apartment himself, carrying no lawyers, no corporate documents, and none of the arrogance I remembered from the boardroom because the company had lost almost 40% of its market value. And Veyron had informed them that it would only reconsider negotiations if I returned to lead them. I expected him to ask for forgiveness, but instead he placed a folder on my kitchen table and said, Tell me what you need. So I opened it and gave him conditions that shocked him. Complete control over strategic partnerships, a permanent board position, compensation tied directly to performance, legal protection against arbitrary dismissal, and one additional provision allowing me to develop independent businesses outside North Star's core operations without surrendering controlling ownership, because I had finally understood that security was not something a company gave an employee. It was something a professional built for herself. I returned to North Star not as the frightened executive who had once begged senior leaders to recognize her work, but as someone who had learned exactly how much leverage her knowledge possessed. And my first objective was rebuilding the Veyron agreement without pretending the original deal could simply be restored. Adrian demanded stronger protections, a larger equity share for Veyron, and independent oversight of North Star's management. And although Malcolm hated every concession, he eventually signed because the alternative was bankruptcy. While I quietly began noticing something else during those negotiations. Hundreds of talented women inside our industry were struggling with workplace rules, outdated expectations, and expensive professional clothing designed around appearances rather than the realities of modern working life. That observation became the beginning of something far larger than revenge. Because using my newly negotiated independence clause, I created a separate venture called Meridian Form, a company dedicated to adaptive professional clothing and workplace accessories that could change between formal, conservative, and modern styles without forcing women to purchase three separate wardrobes. I recruited Maya Chen, a brilliant industrial designer from Seattle, and together we spent months testing fabrics, hidden fasteners, adjustable jacket structures, reversible collars, modular sleeves, and elegant office dresses that could subtly change their appearance in seconds, while I personally funded the early prototypes and kept every financial transaction separate from North Star. So no one could ever accuse me of stealing company resources or using corporate property for personal gain. 6 months after my return, I walked into North Star's annual strategy conference carrying a black garment bag, and instead of presenting another quarterly revenue forecast, I opened it and revealed the first Meridian Form collection to an audience of executives who had expected a routine business presentation. The room became strangely quiet as I explained that the company would own a minority stake in my venture under the contract they had willingly signed, while I retained controlling ownership. And when Malcolm nervously asked why a technology corporation was connected to a clothing company, I answered, because innovation does not belong to one industry and neither does dignity. Before demonstrating a jacket that transformed from formal boardroom attire into a lighter business casual design, followed by a dress whose length and silhouette could be adjusted without compromising its structure. The launch became unexpectedly successful, not because I had built it as a weapon against Blake, but because thousands of customers recognized themselves in the problem we were solving. And within months, Meridian Form had expanded from a handful of prototypes into a profitable international brand whose story appeared in business magazines, morning programs, and professional publications. Blake, meanwhile, had been removed from executive leadership and transferred to a junior operations position after an internal review uncovered several other complaints about his treatment of employees. But when he eventually approached me privately and admitted that he had judged my competence by something as meaningless as appearance, I refused to humiliate him or demand his resignation, telling him instead, "You don't need me to destroy your career. You need to decide whether the person you became is the person you want to remain." And that conversation became more satisfying than any public revenge could have been. A year after my dismissal, Northstar had stabilized, Veyron had completed the revised partnership, Meridian Form had become an independent company, and I stood on a stage in New York announcing a foundation funded by my business profits that would provide professional training, mentorship, and legal resources to employees facing workplace discrimination. I finally understood that the greatest consequence of that terrible afternoon was not that Blake lost his position, that Northstar lost billions in potential value, or that I became financially successful. It was that a moment designed to make me feel small forced me to discover a version of myself that no longer needed permission to succeed. And if my story has taught me anything, it is that sometimes the door that closes behind you is not the end of your career. It is the entrance to a life you were too afraid to build while that door was still open. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.